Today I will be talking about how I've noticed female authors are taking over best-selling lists in previously male-dominated genres, and as you can see, my fun little title is Magic, Dragons, and Postmodern Feminism. If there's something we love, it is a fun little title. So basically, this sort of research that I did for this panel about female creators started as just something that I had noticed as a reader. I have loved to read my entire life, and my favorite genres have always been science fiction and fantasy. And I feel like the last few decades, even though I've only been alive for 2, I feel like just looking at the copyright dates in books and just like blogs and Goodreads especially, I've noticed that the last few decades have seen way more female authors rise to the top of these 2 genres, which have been previously male-dominated. According to the bookseller, 18 out of the top 20 novels in these categories were written by women in 2023. 18 out of 20. This is compared to only 25 out of the top 100 and 3 in the top 20 in 2019 being written by women. And that is a huge jump just in 4 years. So just noticing that, it brings up so many questions of where have these women authors been, why have they not been at the top of the genre, and what societal changes have occurred for this to happen. So the way that I sort of did my research and collected my data for this project is there's some statistics out there, but there's not much academic literature about literature in a way. There's not too many things. So the way I sort of did my research was through authors' blogs. A lot of authors have blogs online websites, and they write a lot about their experience in publishing and everything. So that's how I gathered most of my data for this project. So I just wanted to start with some more statistics. And these are from, I believe, 2013, because it's been exactly about 10 years. So more stories have been written by or published by men than stories by women, and you can see the statistics. Men at 56.2% and women at 42.4%. Now we're going to break those numbers down into science fiction stories. Men have written 61.8% and women 36.8%. And in the 5 markets that only publish science fiction novels, so these are the top-selling publishers, the statistics are 71.9% of these stories have been published by men and 28.1% have been published by women. And a main question that's been raised is, does this stem from the lack of women in STEM at this time? This is 10 years ago, and a lot of us were very young at that time. And I know something that was really prevalent just from my personal experience in our childhoods was sort of a rise of STEM being a focus in school and a rise of it being for everyone. And at this point, even though it's 10 years ago, I feel like there was still not as much of an emphasis on the field of science being a field for women to be in as well. So to sort of get into the male past and the big science fiction writers of the past that are still big names, but have completely dominated the best-selling list for a very long time. Actually, 29 out of 33 grandmasters of science fiction, there's a committee that decides this somewhere in books, big book people decide who becomes a grandmaster of science fiction, and 29 out of the 33 have been male so far. And 3 of these include Frank Herbert, who has been coined to write the most sophisticated science fiction series ever in Dune. I have loved Dune personally, but calling it the most sophisticated science fiction series ever could be possibly a stretch. The next I would like to discuss and use as an example is J.R.R. Tolkien. He is denoted as the king of fantasy novels, and I have pictures of all 3 here. This is Herbert, this is Tolkien, and then this is George R.R. Martin, who is famous for writing the Game of Thrones series, which is very interesting because, as many have probably seen the show more so than read the books, there are strong themes of romance throughout these novels, more so than Herbert's and Tolkien's, but he still gets the same title of Grandmaster. He still gets the same connotation around his name of being one of the best writers ever in these genres. Oh. So where were the women in this time? Women were writing novels, and women were never not writing, but many were afraid of publishing. their stories more so than anything. Like the numbers that we examined from 2013, those were publishing numbers. So it doesn't mean that they're not writing. It's just going through the process that it takes to get a book to the shelves. For some reason, women were not doing this at the time. And many of these women, according to their blog posts, felt like they were being bullied out of the genre of science fiction and fantasy because of the names of Herbert Martin Tolkien. Felt like it was leading them to submit less works and being afraid of failure because they didn't see their works as being good enough for these genres. And they were mainly pushed into more of romance novels with their books, or like young adult novels, because those were seen as being like taken less seriously, including themes that were, I guess, important or serious enough to be considered science or high works of fantasy. So they were largely publishing in that genre. And even when they sort of did publish in fantasy or science fiction, many did not use their first names or wrote under aliases so that no one could guess their gender. And the biggest example of this that everyone should know is J.K. Rowling, published her incredibly successful Harry Potter series. It is young adult, but starts to progress more into adult fiction. But would she have been as high of a bestseller in the decades that she published if she had used her actual name? It's a really interesting question to ask, especially with the huge amount of success that franchise has now. So I have noticed in the last 4 years from those statistics from the first page of how many, going from 3 out of 20 in 2019 to 18 out of 20 in 2023, and like these are the 3 biggest examples on the Amazon best-selling list. These are the top 3 women right now in any genre, but all of them fall into science fiction and fantasy. So the first one that I would like to talk about is Sarah J. Maas. She has sold 38 million copies of her book worldwide, and she has been kind of denoted as creating the genre of romantasy. If anyone's a reader and has seen, it's a big trend on social media right now. This genre has like taken off as a hashtag, and she has kind of been the pioneer of this, which is really interesting to me because a lot of her content is no different than Game of Thrones, but why is she suddenly the pioneer of this genre in the last 4 years when his books have been out for decades at this point? The next author, that I discussed is Rebecca Yarros. She has become immensely popular in the last, I think, 2 years. She's had 2 books come out in 2 years in the fantasy genre, and she became a bookstore called Waterstone's fastest-selling pre-order title in a single day. And something interesting about Yarros is that she has had a career of writing books for 10 years now. She has had published books for 10 years, but has only become popular in the last 2 years because she started writing fantasy novels. She wrote romance novels for so long and never received any praise. And suddenly she's at the top of an Amazon bestseller list as she moves into this genre. So I think it's something super interesting to think about. And the last author that I would like to talk about is V.E. Schwab. Also has been publishing books for a very long time, but she started in young adult fiction because she was told by her manager and her management team that her work wasn't high level enough to be considered adult fiction or science fiction as the genre she's in now. And she tried everything in her power to make her work be taken seriously. And a quote that I pulled from an op-ed that she was a part of, I take a gender-neutral pseudonym as I did. I try to be mainstream. I try to be palatable, and I still get disqualified. So she has achieved success in the last 5 years, major success. She, like I've said, she is the top of the Amazon best-selling list for these genres, but it's hard. Her experience to get there has been a lot more difficult. So really, what has caused these changes is something that I really contemplated and went through all these blog posts, all these op-ed articles, trying to find out what changed to make these women suddenly become so famous in literature. So recent surveys from the last 2 years coming out of COVID show that women read more than men, and they read specifically fiction. So, really including the genres of fantasy and science fiction. So they're already reading more than men, and they're choosing to read fiction novels, which is very interesting. Also, I've found statistics showing that more women are working in the entire publishing chain. From editors to authors to copywriters, there's more women just working in the field of writing, whether they're writing the books or not. So just them being in the chain of the publishing helps a lot to get these stories published, to make women not feel afraid to get their stories published because they're no longer entering a male-dominated, I guess, creation chain or anything. And the last point that I would like to make is that these women seem to know their audience right now and seem to know what their audiences want. And I think that's something that social media has caused a big change in, because they're starting to get they can get real-time feedback from their audiences. They can keep up with all the shifting trends as quickly as social media trends can shift. And these women know what they're doing, and they know how to do it well. And I would be really interested to see how many more women become grandmasters of science fiction in the future. Cool.